Chipeta was born in 1843, a time when the Utes roamed an area of about 225,000 square miles. Within 15 years of her birth, gold was discovered near Denver, Colorado, and the U.S. government negotiated a treaty with the Uncompahgre Utes. Many promises were made. Unfortunately, none were kept. Chief Uray's first wife, Black Mare, died shortly after their son Perron was born. Chipeta helped care for Perron and the household, then married Chief Uray when she was 16 years old. Tragically, Perron was kidnapped by the Sioux during a buffalo hunt. We can only imagine how heartbreaking it must have been for Chipeta to lose her only son. Chipeta and Uray witnessed manifest destiny on a personal level. As more and more gold was discovered, seeing a white settler on their land became more common. As a result, the U.S. government relied on Uray more often as an interpreter and mediator. Unfortunately, the white people chose him as a leader, and many other Ute tribes saw him as a traitor to their people. Roland McCook, Chipeta's great-great-grandson, confirms this viewpoint. There was a negative side to Uray from the Indians' viewpoint. He was a white man's Indian, so his wife was looked upon as that too. In 1868, 7 Colorado Ute tribes negotiated a new treaty with the U.S. government. The Utes only retained about 1/3 of the state. For being such a good mediator, negotiator, and interpreter, Uray and Chipeta were given a house by the government, and Uray was paid about $500 to $1,000 a year. Chipeta and Uray observed how powerful and numerous the white Americans were. Therefore, they tried to convince their people that the only way to survive was through cooperation with the Americans. Uray once said, "The agreement that an Indian makes to a United States treaty is like the agreement a buffalo makes with his hunter when pierced with arrows. All he can do is lie down and give in." In 1873, miners and spectators poured into Ute lands, once again due to another gold discovery, this time in the San Juan Mountains. As a result, the Utes lost a large portion of land west of the Continental Divide. Chipeta, Chief Uray, and 8 others traveled to Washington to negotiate the Bruneau Treaty with the U.S. government. The Meeker incident started when Nathan Meeker, an Indian agent, tried to make the White River Utes into farmers. Many Utes refused, so Meeker requested military assistance. The Utes feared attack from the military and ambushed the troops. Utes went to the agency, killed Meeker and all the white men there, then took the women and children as hostages. Chipeta was influential in getting the hostages released and invited them to her own home to recover. This was just the kind of incident white Americans had been waiting for. In their opinion, they now had a valid excuse to seize Ute lands. It made no difference to them that Chipeta, Uray, and the majority of the other Uncompahgre Utes had nothing to do with the deaths at Meeker. Chipeta was treated as a curiosity, especially on her last trip to Washington. On January 7, 1880, Chipeta, Uray, and 10 Ute chiefs were almost hanged in Alamosa, Colorado, by an angry mob of people who thought that all Utes should suffer for the deaths at Meeker. They were there to board a train for Washington, D.C. Before a federal judge, Chipeta gave testimony about the Meeker incident and was right beside Uray while negotiating terms for the reservation. When Meeker hostages their testimonies about what happened, Flora Ellen Price gave the nation a glimpse into Chipeta's character. She said, "We were received as old, long-lost friends. Miss Uray wept for our hardships, and her motherly face, dusky but beautiful, with sweetness and compassion, was wet with tears. We left her crying." Uray was sick with a kidney disease that would soon take his life. On August 24, 1880, Uray died. The Denver Tribune published an obituary that said, "The friend of the white man and the protector of the Indian," continually doing everything in his power to create favor for the white man with the Indian. Chipeta cut her long hair, as in the way of her people, as a sign of grief and mourning when Uray died. In photos taken after his death, Chipeta's hair is always short. In September 1881, 1,458 Uncompahgre Utes were removed from Colorado and on their way to the new reservation. Chipeta wasn't allowed to bring a wagon, and therefore household goods were not brought with her. We can only guess to the depths of her loss, both material and emotional. At the Grand River, the Utes were loaded into massive ferries like cattle. With every step they took, they were headed forth away from their sacred land and towards the unknown. Once in their strange new land, Chipeta lived with her brother John McCook near the Book Cliff Mountains. There they raised sheep on one of the prettier but more remote sections of the reservation. Unlike their old way of life, harsh conditions made life on the Unitah-Ouray Reservation difficult, and the Utes fell farther and farther into extreme poverty. They were confined to the boundaries of the reservation and not able to leave to hunt for food. Unfortunately, the government's inadequate rations were often late, spoiled, and full of insects. Children were dying of starvation, and it broke Chipeta's heart that the government's promises had been broken more times than not. In 1911, the United States government faced lawsuits for their failure to honor the Treaty of 1880. The money promised to the Utes from the sale of their lands was never given to them. On August 14, 1911, a Colorado Springs newspaper published a story about Chipeta and the plight of her people. Cries of justice were raised. Government restrictions could not keep Chipeta from visiting her friends. During the last week of August 1911, the Southern Band of Utes traveled to Colorado Springs for the Shankive Festival. This annual visit includes sacred rituals in Manitou Springs. While there, Chipeta met up with her dearest friend, Mrs. Margaret Adams. Chipeta loved sitting on Mrs. Adams's porch holding her hand. These two women, each from very different walks of life, were able to form a strong bond in spite of differences. In 1916, the Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Cato Sells, contacted Chipeta. He had heard of her difficulties and felt badly for her. Cato Sells asked her if she needed anything, and she politely responded, "I desire nothing. What is good enough for my people is good enough for me. Never have I had an unkind feeling or an unkind thought towards the government in Washington. And if I were to express what I have on my mind, someone would misunderstand and think that Chipeta's heart has changed and that she is no longer friendly towards the government. I was promised a good place to live in Utah, but that promise has been forgotten." Devout followers sent Chipeta gifts and money. Cato Sells continued thinking about Chipeta and looking for ways to help her. If she wouldn't accept fine china or money, what else could he give her? The superintendent's gift arrived at Bitter Creek along with a letter that read, "Chipeta, my friend, I have read with great interest of the valuable services rendered to the whites by Chief Ouray and yourself at the time of the Indian troubles many years ago. It is good to know that these unfortunate conditions no longer exist, but the Indians now live side by side with the white man in peace and friendship. To show that the government has not forgotten what you did at the time, and as a slight token of its appreciation, I am sending you an Indian robe or shawl. I hope you will like the shawl. With best wishes, your friend, Cato Sells." Chipeta realized that this was the commissioner's way of apologizing for the government's neglect. 35 years after their eviction from Colorado, Chipeta took her own steps towards opening the door of communication to allow healing between the government and the Utes begin. In return, Chipeta sent Cato Sells a beautiful handmade saddle blanket and a letter that read, "My friend, your beautiful shawl received and was appreciated very much. In token of shawl received, am sending you a saddle blanket, also picture of myself. I am in good health considering my age and hope to live much longer to show my friendship and appreciation to all the kind white people and hope that this state of affairs exists through the rest of my lifetime. With best wishes, I am always, your friend Chipeta." Chipeta's heart began to mend, and she tried to let joy triumph in her everyday experiences. She had overcome many hardships and successfully navigated the tragedies in Colorado. In 1918, Chipeta gave $500 of her own money to the Red Cross. She thought that the funds were of no use to her, and during the great influenza epidemic, her donation was put to use by helping youths that could not pay for health care. By the age of 81, Chipeta was totally blind and suffered from arthritis and chronic stomach ailments. 44 years after Ouray's death, on August 16, 1942, Chipeta slipped peacefully into the spirit world. That same year, Utes were made U.S. citizens. She was selected to be on the Centennial Tapestry honoring 18 women who had important roles in the settlement and development of Colorado. McCook remembered hearing many stories about Chipeta. When asked for his impressions, he reflected simply that she was a brave woman, of course. She accepted the situation that her husband and his influence would bring on her. She was loyal to her husband, stood by him all the time, even when his purposes were futile. Nobody would have guessed the impact Chipeta would have on so many individuals. Her story is not only a testimony of strength and gentleness, but also one of peace, forgiveness, and respect for all races.